Hey everybody, this is Mr. Storm. Today we're actually going to add in some collisions. We're going to make it so that our ghost friend here can actually collide with objects. But first we need other objects for it to collide with. So in the interest of doing that, I've made a very, very simple object that we can add into our game. Let me go ahead and grab the level here that I've created. Now this level is very basic. It is basically just a couple of barriers for our ghost so that he wouldn't be able to move through them. Let's set this pixels per unit to 16. Let's turn off the filter and turn off the compression because again, this project isn't going to be a large one. It's basically going to be one level with only a couple of objects inside of it. All right, and then let's go ahead and drag our level out. And let's set it at 0, 0 on the transform. And I'm going to zoom out my camera just a bit. Okay, so now we can see that the level is set up. We've got some barriers here. Again, it doesn't look super good. I threw this together in like 5 minutes on Photoshop. But it gives us something that we can play around in. All right, now if I go ahead and hit play, let's test out our game, make sure it still works. You can see I can move around still, but I can basically behave like ghosts do. I can float through each of these walls. There is no problem there. And my camera looks a bit weird, so we want to maybe play around with the camera settings so we can fit the whole level in. Yeah, and we got to make it so we can't move through these walls. So I'm going to take myself out of play mode. First, let's fix these camera settings. So it might be tempting to go over to main camera and actually make it bigger and all that, which we could do, and that's a valid way of solving this problem. But really the most important thing here in the camera settings is going to be our background. I want it to be a black background so it kind of matches the rest. Maybe even a little bit lighter, so it's like a gray background. That might be... So there's a distinct, I don't know. That looks pretty good. I'm looking at the camera preview down here, and you may not see a difference, but for me, there's a subtle difference. Okay, now here we can actually increase the camera by pulling it forward or backward. I'm going to keep it at 5, and I'm going to go over here to this game view. Now in game view, we can actually set the resolution for our display for specific resolution sizes. So we have free aspect, which it's going to tie itself to a regular resolution, but we can also create new ones. And I should have looked this up before the video, but I'm going to look it up now. So basically what I'm doing is I'm looking up the aspect ratio for old Super Nintendo games. So it is a 256 by 224 resolution, which our background level has been built to those specifications. It is 256 pixels across and 224 pixels tall. And it's an aspect ratio of 8 by 7. So when games are stretched, it's stretched to 4:3. So let's do the actual 4:3. Let's give it its proper resolution. So down here, I don't see any 4:3 resolutions. So I'm going to click the plus. I'm going to add, we'll call it SNES, and we'll make it an aspect ratio, and the width is going to be 4, and the height is going to be 3. I'm going to click OK. So now our aspect ratio is locked in properly, but our camera is still not the right size. So at this point, we can come over here and we can scale the camera up a little bit so we can see better, so we can better see the game. All right. Perfect. Now if we hit play, we will be able to see the entire game. And everything looks great. And so, yeah, we can see the whole level and all that. And I have some room here on the sides where I can put in some info if we want. If we want to create like a user interface, we can put some stuff in here, which we probably will do later on. But for now, this looks pretty good. So now we have our camera set up. We have our I called it SNEW. It's supposed to be SNES. I did SNEW. All right, fine. Weird. All right. Anyway, so we have our camera set up. We have our display, our aspect ratio set up, and we have our level in there properly sized and whatnot. Now we actually need to make sure that this ghost cannot go through these levels, these areas. All right, so the way we're going to do this is we are going to create something called a collider. A collider is simply just another component that you can add to an object, and that collider will collide with other objects so that they will not pass through one another. So let's select our ghost here, and I'm going to click Add Component. And then I'm going to type collider to see what options we have. And you'll see down here we have a box collider, we have a box collider 2D, we have a capsule collider 2D, circle collider 2D, whatnot, and so forth. We have a bunch of different kinds of colliders that we can add. Obviously, we want to focus on the 2D colliders because all of these other objects, or all these other colliders, are for 3D objects. So we're going to choose a collider that matches our ghost here. Now, it looks like it's a box collider, and that would make sense, or even maybe a capsule collider. But I'm going to use a circle collider so I can show you some things with colliders that we want to consider later on. So I'm going to add a circle collider around my ghost here. Now, my circle collider should be showing up here, but it's not. I'm going to click Edit Collider so we can see it. So now we can see we have a circle around my ghost. That's going to mean that anytime I collide with another object with a collider, then this edge right here will not pass into that other collider. Now, we don't have any other colliders on the game yet, but we're going to edit our level so that it has colliders as well. But first we need to edit this down. This collider is way too big. I don't want to collide whenever I haven't hit my actual ghost. So I'm going to grab this handle and edit it down just a bit. And now notice it's not centered on my object. So I can go down here to offset, and I can grab the X and I can kind of push it over a little bit. And it's kind of finicky. I'm going to make it even just a bit smaller. Okay, that looks about good. And I'm going to push it up on the Y just a little bit so that it's around his head. I want his like ghost taily thingies to be able to dip into other colliders. That'll look kind of nice. All right, so now I have a collider around my ghost. That collider is going to make it so that it will not interact with all of these other objects in my game, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to grab my level, and let's go ahead and start creating some colliders in the level. Now, with an object as complex as this, I don't want to put a collider around the whole thing. Let me show you what happens if I do that. So let's put a box collider 2D around the whole object, and we can see it's around the entire object. Now watch what happens when I hit play. Uh-oh. See that? My ghost just immediately jumped to the top of the screen. Now, if you're thinking about colliders, you're probably wondering why that happened. Well, colliders can't exist within each other, right? So the collider around my ghost was inside of another collider, and it freaked it out and basically said, this can't exist, so we've got to push one of these colliders out of the other. So it moved my ghost out of my level very, very quickly. So that's not what we want. What we want to do is we want a box collider around all of these edges that we don't want to interact with our ghost. So I'm going to select Edit Collider here. And I'm going to use these little handles to kind of create a collider boundary, right? And it doesn't have to be super precise. This game is not, it's not going to be something that we're putting out there in the public. So we can actually have a little bit of we don't have to be like pixel perfect with our colliders. I know some people really, really do. So now let's check to see if we can jump outside of the top of this and see if our colliders are working. All right, so I can still float through all of the other walls here. Let's go ahead and try to leave the top. And look, notice that it's stuck. I can't actually leave this area, which is exactly what we want, right? We want there to be a barrier there. Now, to create the rest of the colliders here, it's pretty easy. All we have to do is add a bunch of new components, and then we just basically edit those components so that the colliders, or we add a bunch of new colliders, and we just edit those colliders to create boundaries. All right. And so now we should have an edge around our entire game. So if I were to hit play again, I can't leave there. Uh-oh. What's going on now? Look at my flippy ghost. All right, well, my colliders are working, but something else is happening. This is a problem. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show you before. This is why I used a circle collider, so I can show something very, very important about colliders and rigid bodies. So let's scroll up past all of our colliders. Actually, our rigid body, where is our rigid body? Oh, I have the level selected. Let's go to the ghost object and go to our rigid body. In here, the rigid body will basically treat this as a regular object that has physics collisions, right? Or has physics applied to it. Now, when we start colliding, physics does all kinds of crazy things whenever things collide. And in our case, our circle collider was actually rotating as it was rubbing up against the other colliders that exist in the game. We actually don't want that to happen. We want a circle collider, but we don't want it to rotate. So what we can do is over here in our rigid body 2D, we can click on this constraints section, and inside constraints, we can click freeze rotation on the Z axis. That will make it so that our ghost won't flip around. It won't rotate at all whenever we hit our edges. So let's try that. Okay. So now I can run up the wall and I'm not rotating at all. My ghost stays exactly where he's supposed to. Perfect. Okay, good. So now that's working properly. The next thing we need to do is we need to start setting up collisions for all of these internal barriers here. And before I do that, I'm actually going to move my ghost into his starting position. This is where I want my ghost to start the game. And this is going to be kind of like a little maze game with, spikes that we have to avoid and things to pick up and all that. So I'm going to keep him here. And the goal is to get down to this area here. All right. So we're starting at kind of a wider area. We go through some switchbacks with some spikes that are going to be in there. We'll do spikes later. And then down here, we have a narrow area we need to get through to collect and get to the end of the level. Okay, so now let's start creating some colliders here for these objects. Now you'll notice that we have a ton of colliders already added onto the object. We could keep adding colliders to the same object, and that's fine. It just means we're going to have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're going to have 9 different collider components attached to this. So we can do that. Or we can create an empty object. Let's do that. Create an empty object. We're going to call this internal collisions. You would probably usually want to create just a collider object that holds all of your colliders on it and then have that be a child of the level. But we already created some colliders here. So inside this internal collisions, I'm going to create a new box collider. I will edit that box collider, and then I'm going to make it surround this wall here. Okay. Then I'm going to create a new component, box collider. I'll make this one surround this wall. All right. And we're just going to keep doing the same thing, right? Just going to keep adding colliders. and making them surround each section of the wall. And again, you don't really need to be pixel perfect on this. So if you find yourself spending, 10 minutes, 20 minutes trying to get this to be perfect, don't bother, right? As long as the collisions work, that's all we care about. If there's a bit of if there's like a 2 pixel overlap or something like that, that's not going to really hurt the game too much. Especially since we're building this game just to learn. If you were building a game that you wanted to like sell, like I said, to customers, then you would want to really care about the collisions and make sure they all felt right. But for now, this is fine. So what we have is every wall now has a collider around it. This empty space here has no collisions, no colliders in the empty space. So we should be able to go through the entire maze with our ghost that can't go through walls. Now you might be wondering, Mr. Storm, why did you make a game about a ghost and then make it so it can't go through walls? Well, the real answer is because I wasn't really thinking about it and I just wanted to make a ghost. I thought, hey, let's see if we can make a really cool retro-looking ghost. But the more I think about it, the more I actually kind of like the idea, because games or really any media with characters that kind of subvert expectations make for interesting conflict and interesting stories. So we have a ghost that can't pass through walls. So maybe he feels self-conscious about that. Maybe his friends tease him about it because he's different, whatnot. And he has to use this limitation to get through the game. Even though all of his friends could probably just float right through the walls and collect everything and then finish the level, this guy has to actually go through each of the mazes, which, makes for an interesting story. Anyway, so we now have a maze set up. We have our ghost. He cannot float through the walls, and we have our collision set up properly so that our game is playable. All right, in the next video, we are going to be adding collisions for objects. We're actually going to, put in some, like maybe a bad guy or something, and we're going to determine how our game interacts with that bad guy, probably a spike. Yeah, that's where we're going to end it this week. But in the next video, we'll actually interact more appropriately with collisions, and we'll actually get into some scripting. We'll script out some collision interactions as well. All right, cool. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.